Are you feeling trapped or stuck in life or behind or not exactly where you wanted to go? Are you feeling like you're doing something because somebody told you to do it and it's going okay, but you think it could go better? If that is you, you might be in what I call the Velvet Coffin. Hi, I'm Suzy Welch. I'm a professor at NYU Stern School of Business and the author of Becoming You, a proven method for crafting your authentic life. Look, the Velvet Coffin, I know it's a terrible name, okay? It's a creepy name, but it's such a real thing. It's a term I use to describe you being in a very comfortable place. That's the velvet part. It's cushiony, it's satin, and you're laying there and everything's okay. It's comfortable. But you know what? When you're in a coffin, the lid slowly closes. The first time I ever heard the term, the Velvet Coffin, I was young. I was probably 21 or 22 years old. I was working at the Miami Herald in their Fort Lauderdale bureau. I was a police reporter in those days, a crime reporter. And there was a spectacularly successful reporter who was 5 or 6 years older than me. And it looked to me like she had it made in the shade, okay? She was doing really well. She had a better title than all of us. And everyone thought she was fantastic and that she was going to be promoted up the ladder at the Miami Herald and eventually be some kind of big editor there. And one day I came back from an assignment and everybody was whispering and they said, Geraldine is leaving the Miami Herald. She's leaving. And I thought, how could she leave? Everything looks so good for her. And I ran over to her desk because I really admired her. I mean, she was one of my many mentors. I ran over to her and I said, what are you doing? And she said, Suzy, I'm in a velvet coffin and the lid is closing. Life is very good for me here. They really like me. But it's not what I want from my life. There's something bigger for me. There's something better for me. It's in New York City, near my family. It may not even be in journalism. My life here is kind of B+, B+, and maybe that's good enough for some people, but I'm shoving open the lid. And she actually did that with her hand. And she said, and I'm getting out of here before it's too late. And I remember thinking, oh my God, would I ever have that courage and that confidence to shove open the lid on a life that was pretty good? Because at that point I was kind of struggling and things were not pretty good. Things were pretty stressful. And then I thought, yeah, I'd just give anything to get to where she was. But she was saying this very important concept, which is sometimes we have this inner fire and this inner belief that B or B+ is not good enough. We only have one wild and precious life, to quote the Mary Oliver poem, which says, tell me, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And she was saying, it's not here because this is not where I want to end up. She did go on to have quite a spectacular career. She ended up running a large group that monitored all newspapers. It was a really high-profile job. It's what she wanted. I actually got back in touch with her years later and asked her about her career. And she said, you know, it didn't happen immediately and I had to zig and I had to zag and I took some setbacks. When I left that B+ life, I sort of didn't get immediately what I wanted, but I eventually did. But she had the guts to get out of it. And I'm wondering, if you recognize yourself in this, are you settling because it's just so comfortable? It's expedient. It would take a lot of undoing to do something different. You might upset other people's expectations. You might, rattle the cages, as they say. You might have to make a sacrifice with your immediate pay or where you live to get to where you want to go. And that's a reason that people sort of wake up in their 40s or 50s is when it typically happens. And they say, oh, wow, I just kept on taking the easiest turn on this road. And I kept feeling comfortable. And I refused to get out of my comfort zone so that I might go to a place where I felt even better than I feel today. That's really hard. And that's what the Velvet Coffin is. Every time I write about the Velvet Coffin or talk about it or lecture about it, I look around the room and I see a lot of faces that are kind of like this, as people have that pain, that pang of self-recognition. Now, look, there's a lot of good reasons that we find ourselves in the Velvet Coffin. And a lot of times these are really understandable. They're family obligations. You've got a young kid, so you can't go live in Paris and party all the time. Or you have work that you truly love that's really important, and so you're not ever going to have some financial things, some belongings that you really want. And so we do make sacrifices for our values along the way, and we make sacrifices for people we love along the way that land us in the velvet coffin with the lid slowly closing. That is life. That's living by default. There's 3 Ds by which you can live. The first D, which I just mentioned, is default, where we live reactive lives. We do the best we can with the stuff that comes at us, with the kid stuff, the work stuff, the family stuff, we have to live in Milwaukee or we have to stay in Seattle, and we just do the best we can where we are, even though we know we're making a lot of compromises and sacrifices compared to the life we would really want to live. And many of us live by default our whole lives long. It's exhausting. Sometimes we feel a lot of resentment about it. It can make people sad along the way, and some people get resigned to it. But that's the first D. The second D is living by deliberation, which is when you say, I can't live like that all the time. I want to try to sprinkle in some intentionality. I want to make some statements about who I am and what I want. And I want to try to move the needle on getting myself towards a life that's more what I hope for myself. And that's pretty good. It's better. And some of us live that way our whole lives long. But the third D is living by design. When we have a theory of ourselves and of what we want, we have a theory of our goals, we have a theory of the life we want to live, and we actually talk about it openly. We identify our values to other people, and we say yes or no depending on those values, and we bust out of the velvet coffin and we live by design. Okay, how do you get out of a life that you might describe as the velvet coffin? Well, there's one essential first step, and that is knowing your values. Values are really hard to know. It's a term. I've done research that shows that only 17% of the general populace even knows what values are. They mix them up with virtues or they confuse them with personality traits. That's completely understandable. Why? Did you ever take a class in high school or college that was like, what are values? No, you didn't. And yet values are incredibly important. Values are the deeply held beliefs, motivations, and desires that drive our actions and behaviors. There's 15 personal human values. All of us have some level of those 15 values, and we can have them, hold them deeply in our heart, but we don't always express them. And that's when we're in the velvet coffin. When we have a strong value, we want a big life, for instance, or we want beautiful things. These are all values. We want a lot of money, or we want a big family. These are all values, one of the 15 values. And we don't actually live them. That's when we find ourselves in the velvet coffin. So the number one thing you can do to get out of the velvet coffin is get a reckoning, get a clear sense of what your values are. I am very happy to say there's a test, and it's unbelievably easy to do. And it wasn't for a long time. And it made me incredibly frustrated that I was teaching about this at NYU Stern. And at a certain point, I said, I'm going to create the test at Becoming You Labs, which is part of the initiative on purpose and flourishing at NYU. And I got together with some data scientists and some really smart people. And we created the Values Bridge, which you can find at thevaluesbridge.com. And in 22 minutes, you can know what your values are. And not only can you know what your values are, but you will get a ranking on every single one of those values, on every single one about how much you're actually living it. So say you have the value of scope. People almost never talk about this value. It's one of the 15 human values. Scope is how big and exciting a life you want at one end of the spectrum. And at the other end, it's having a controlled and predictable life. That's the value of scope. How big, exciting, and even chaotic a life do you want? The way to get out of the velvet coffin is to know that about all of your values and find out where the gaps are. And you will find if you have no variance, if you have no gaps, you're not in the velvet coffin. You're living your values. Thanks so much for listening. I know it's not a great name, the velvet coffin. I can't think of a name that describes it quite as well. And frankly, I kind of stuck with the name the velvet coffin over all these years because sometimes it's just that shock that makes people go, okay, you're talking to me. Maybe that's you today. All right, I'm Suzy Welch. Thanks for being here.